Chat, does anybody remember, if you cast your memories back to 2010, during the 2010 election, when the Conservative Party under David Cameron said, you have to vote Conservative because the Labour Party have spent too much money. They've spent too much money, they've spent money that didn't exist, money they didn't have, and we need to make sure that the nation is living within its means by tightening our belts and cutting public spending. And then when they got into government, they said, it's even worse than we feared. Look at this note that says that there's no money left that Liam Byrne has left in the Treasury office. Remember this? They happened in 2010. They said that the government had spent too much money. They got into government and said, things are even worse than we feared. Let's attack the previous government on spending too much money. Enter Darren Jones MP, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, writing exclusively in the Daily Mirror for the Labour Party. And he has got an article here, says, the Tories spent billions of pounds they didn't have. We must never forgive them. I wonder, chat, if this is going to be apologia for austerity and going to be used as a justification for more spending cuts, more austere politics. I wonder if that's going to be the cover. It's almost like we've re-elected David Cameron in terms of political rhetoric. And the idea that we can spend billions that we don't have is nonsense because we are a sovereign currency issuer. Let's read. Exclusive. The Tories spent billions they didn't have. We must never forgive them. Writing exclusively for the Sunday Mirror, Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, says Britain needs to make up for lost time and there'll be more difficult decisions to come. Sounds very much like exactly what David Cameron said in 2010. Sounds almost identical to this idea that Labour have spent all the money and we need to make difficult decisions in terms of spending to ensure that we live within our means as a country, even though as a sovereign currency issuer, we have all the money, we have infinite money. You can't spend all of it because that would be inflationary, but you cannot spend money that you don't have because the Bank of England has all the money because it issues the money. That's how money works in a fiat system. Anyway, economic growth is the first mission of this new Labour government. Why? Because to rebuild Britain and make every part of the country better off, we need businesses to be making profits and workers to be paid well. Do we need businesses to be making profits? They could quite easily be reinvesting those profits or be paying workers more out of those profits, but you do you, Darren. You do you. Britain now needs to make up for lost time. If our economy had grown at the same rate as other major countries over the past 14 years of Conservative government, the UK would have been £140 billion richer. This is true. This is an incontrovertible fact that if we hadn't done austerity and we'd have been growing at a better rate in this country, we would have way larger an economy and we would have more day-to-day spending for tax receipts. We would have more tax receipts for day-to-day spending. This is true. This is true. If you want to stick to a fiscal rule of only borrowing to invest and all day-to-day spending being covered by tax receipts, this is not an unreasonable point for Darren Jones to make if we had grown at the same level as other countries during the period in which the Conservative Party were in government. I, personally, would blame austerity for our lack of growth. I wonder if Darren Jones will talk about this in his article where he's justifying why we are making questionable decisions in terms of cutting spending. This is why this Labour government will fix the foundations and take the tough decisions needed to clear up the mess left behind by the last Conservative government. Yeah, tough decisions. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I've said it before and I'll say it again, chat. It is not a tough decision to take money away from vulnerable people. It is not a tough decision to take money away from people who have no political power. It is not a tough decision to find something that you can spend money on for the welfare state and cut it, like the winter fuel payment for pensioners. That is a very easy political decision because these people have no political power. You know who has loads of political power? The super rich, businesses, private equity. All of these people have loads of political power. It's actually a very difficult decision to attack people who have majority shareholders or stakes in businesses in this country who get to set the narrative if they, for example, own a large national newspaper, for example. The actual difficult decision is raising taxes on people with political power, not cutting spending for people with no political power, but just my 2 cents. Just this weekend, independent experts confirmed that this government inherited a national debt pile at its highest level since the 1960s. I mean, you don't need an independent expert to know that the debt to GDP ratio is higher. You just go to Statista, but whatever, that is true. But there's nothing about having a large debt to GDP ratio that makes your country any worse than one with a lower debt to GDP ratio. There is no economic truth to say that one country is worse than another just because it has a higher debt to GDP ratio. That is a nonsense. This is the legacy of failure from the last government and its failure to get the economy growing. And it's also its failure of austerity, but they're not going to mention the A word, are they? Worse still, statisticians have told us that the previous government borrowed 4.7 billion more from the January to April this year than had been predicted. This was going to be spent on capital investment projects that you've just cut. Borrowing is good if you're investing. These were going into capital investment projects like rail reopenings and all the new hospitals. That was the capital investment plans. Like, part of the 22 billion black hole that Rachel Reeves was talking about, black hole being a really stupid fiscal framework, but we're going to use their language just to be charitable, right? Part of the £22 billion black hole was an underestimation on the cost for capital investment projects. Now, for capital investment projects, these come from new money. You borrow money for capital investment projects. Whilst you can criticise the Tory government for not projecting their costings correctly, which is why that there was this quote-unquote fiscal black hole. But the reason that the black hole exists is because of Labour's fiscal rule about the overall debt to GDP ratio being predicted to fall by the end of the 5th year. If you can't hit that projected, you have to cut the capital investment plan, regardless of whether or not you think that it's efficacious or not. I disagree. I think that you should always be investing in what's necessary to do so, because 5 years as the cut-off point for when debt to GDP must be falling is silly, because some projects turn profitable after 5 years. So you therefore don't invest something that would be long-term profitable for short-term electoral reasons, which is stupid. But the reason why they were borrowing more than they were expected was because of the overinvestment in these capital projects, so the under-appraisal of the cost of what these capital investment projects would be. But you shouldn't cut them. You should still spend the money. And to top it all off, last month we uncovered £22 billion black hole, blah, 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 blah. Half of that black hole, quote unquote, is just money that Labour decided to spend on public sector pay increases. That's included in that £22 billion black hole, by the way, was the public sector pay increases, because they were on the table before, but they weren't agreed to yet. So it's just surprise spending. No, you made a political choice to do that, Labour. It's good that you did. It's good that you made a political choice to pay public sector workers better, but it wasn't a political choice that was forced on you by the Conservatives. You made that choice. And if you want to fund it by increasing day-to-day spending and sticking to your fiscal rules, you're going to have to cut spending elsewhere or raise taxes elsewhere. And because you won't raise taxes elsewhere, outside of a couple of very small taxes like private schools or the non-dom tax status, you're left with taking money away from other people. And what do we have now? We have a whole discourse of, oh, well, Labour are giving money from pensioners to train drivers. This is literally the discourse right now, which you wouldn't have to do if you just tax the rich. That's a political choice that you've made. And that £22 billion black hole is half of it over egged capital investment projects, and the other half is your political choice to raise public sector wages. That doesn't include the £20 billion of public sector cuts of unprotected departments that was detected by the IFS in the run-up to the election this year, which you were called out on multiple times by Stephen Flynn during the election campaign, which you're still committing to, because the leak from the first budget by The Guardian is saying that they're going to be keeping the current level of departmental expenditure up to 1%. So the unprotected departments will still see a real terms cut in funding. And that's the £20 billion that the IFS identified, that Labour ignored and hand-waved away, and are now essentially continuing within government. We warned you there'd be cuts. Did anybody listen? No, they didn't. The public finances have been left in a truly dire state by the reckless and irresponsible Tories. They thought it was okay to agree to £1 billion of spending they knew they didn't have the money to pay for. It was new money for capital investment, Darren. Stop lying to the public about how public spending works. This is insane. You finally have the opportunity to change the zeitgeist on public spending, and you are now using conservative attack lines from 2010 to attack the Conservative Party in exactly the same way that David Cameron attacked the Labour Party in 2010. I cannot properly explain just how ridiculous this narrative is for anybody who cares about broad, long-term political messaging over short-term political gain. It's so disgustingly short-sighted, and it's just David Cameron. It's just David Cameron with a different accent, even though Darren Jones doesn't have necessarily a different accent from David Cameron. Knowing the bills would land on the doormat of a Labour government to deal with, we must never forgive them. Just fix the problems with tax rises. The economy, though, is starting to show glimmers of positivity, as the data from the first half of this year shows that it has started to grow again, under the Conservative government that you're now chastising, but okay. And only by like 0.6% or something, really kind of gangbusters growth. This government is laser focused to ensure that that continues, which is why we've quickly introduced changes to planning to get Britain building. We announced a new National Wealth Fund to bring investment into local areas quicker. We've made a deal with junior doctors to end the strikes and protect our NHS. We're improving the pension system to boost returns for savers. All good things. These are all good things. But why? Why are you using this under the framing of the fact of spending money that they don't have, when that's not true. You're cutting capital investment projects for this. And we're taking steps needed to get the public finances back under control, because we'll never play fast and loose with the nation's finances like the last government did. Who's buying this? Who's buying this rhetoric? The reason the nation's finances are screwed up isn't because they spent money they didn't have, it's because they didn't spend enough money. This is the problem. Interest rates were at 0 for a decade. They could have invested in a gigantic amount of infrastructure spending, and they did the literal opposite. This is the problem. The problem is the lack of spending, not that they spent too much, Darren. Stop it. Stop it. I cannot begin to tell people how terrible this rhetoric is for embedding austerity into the political zeitgeist. Darren Jones should be afraid of losing his seat too, given he's Bristol North West's MP. He also opposed ending arms sales to Israel as it wouldn't end the war. Exactly. Green voters of Bristol North West, you have an excellent opportunity to get rid of people like this for the next election. There will be more difficult decisions to come. These will not be easy, and there are no quick wins. But now more than ever, the British people deserve a government that will do what is right to rebuild the country. Again, they are front-loading the idea that they're going to take the incredibly easy decision to attack the poorest rather than to impose wealth taxes on the richest, because those who donate to the party now, it's not a party for members anymore, it's a party for the super rich. But hey ho, welcome to the Labour Party of 2024, run by Labour Together and the TBI rather than the members. Again, you could take a difficult decision to not have to do any of these things by taxing the rich, but they don't want to do that, do they? And that would rebuild the country, increasing council budgets so they can invest properly, getting rid of the silly fiscal rule over 5 years, make it 10 years, as was suggested by John McDonnell, to do large-scale capital investment projects to get the economy booming again. We could do that, but then that would undermine the narrative of the Tories spending money they don't have, because capital investment projects would come from money that you say we don't have because you're treating it like a household budget. I just want it to go away. I just want it to go away forever, the household budget logic. Here is macro financial expert Daniela Gabor absolutely tearing into Labour over this dumb rhetoric here. What next, Keir Starmer? Channeling "there's no such thing as society" Margaret Thatcher to justify austerity? He will say the government has inherited not just an economic black hole, but a societal black hole, adding, "This is why we have to take action and do things differently. Part of that is being honest with people about the choices we face and how tough this will be." Identical rhetoric to David Cameron. We're going to do more coverage on Starmer's speech on Tuesday, justifying more austerity, but we'll see when we get there. I'm not going to do too much coverage of that now, but what I am going to do is attack Darren Jones for his messaging, trying to, again, salt the ideological earth to try and manufacture consent for more austerity. Hate this stuff. Hate it. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.